In this video, I will give an outline for some basic ideas towards the improvement of the teaching of English language as a second language in schools in Malaysia. The context is rather specific, but the ideas will all come from a general scheme of understanding about the exciting industry of the teaching and learning of English that may be useful for anyone involved in this great enterprise. I will try to break down some of the basic problems and issues confronting the teachers and the language department in schools and some steps necessary in order to improve. Step number one is that the teachers of English language have to first admit or acknowledge that improvement is needed or indeed necessary. It's actually not hard to do. I've been teaching the subject for almost 3 decades now, and obviously in many schools the performance or the proficiency level of the majority of students is really low. The pass rate is not high, and in general the English language is still perceived by many students as perhaps a difficult language or a challenging skill to learn or to master. There is still a significant level of unfamiliarity with the English vocabularies, and the students are still struggling with even things like the class of speech, and especially making stubborn errors in subject-verb agreement, for example. And I'm sure many teachers will readily understand the need to improve in the department. Now, the issue is, has it really been an inherent problem to the teaching of English? Or are there perhaps other reasons? So that's point number one. The realization of the need to improve is, however, not enough. Teachers also need to be genuinely interested, if not excited or intrigued by the possibility of making improvements. And if the teachers themselves are not that interested to explore or to solve this problem, there is always the general public who will continuously demand that the teachers make improvements, for the schools to improve, and for the students to change and to perform. And step two is the question of how to start. Now, change is by itself already a hard thing to do, and making improvement is not such a new idea anyway. So maybe the first thing to do in order to start a big project like this is to actually fulfill step number one first. And I think the key principle for me is the task of putting all our heads together. It cannot be a solo project or a single person to mastermind the whole thing. And now that we've mentioned it, this is actually the biggest challenge. Many teachers seem to prefer to mind their own business, even when it comes to matters pertaining directly to their own vocation, their actual vocation, which is to teach. We, of course, have to deal with a lot of administration tasks, but our society is perhaps very polite, and sometimes the virtue can actually work against real productivity and results. It's funny to think that sometimes, quite regularly, after the teachers graduate from university, that's also the time when they stop talking about pedagogy. Many teachers prefer not to be asked questions such as questions which are to them perhaps sensitive, such as how do you teach, what approaches, what methodologies or theoretical frameworks that you use, do you think your teaching is effective and producing the intended results that you wanted, and so on. But when you think about it, learning by definition is change of behavior, And at the end of the day, how much your students have improved is basically the major thing, if not the only thing, that is evaluated. So we basically have no choice and nowhere to run other than confronting the questions directly. And perhaps a way to do this is to treat the questions together, not as individuals, but as a team. And that will bring us gradually to answer step number 2. That is, we have to start a big mission by coming together in a formal but perhaps casual and intimate session of exploration, to do the brainstorming and to share our experiences. We just need to have a good foundation, in other words, a formal outline of standard for analysis and discussion and synthesis. We can explore so many questions, such as looking at the characteristics and nature of the problems in the learning of English in our country, the factors involved, the limitations in administrations or infrastructure, and more importantly, even on the ineffective habits and attitudes and outlook of teachers themselves. These and other things. And also the general level of intelligence of our students in relation to the demographic background, and perhaps the level of preparedness which we receive them, having them come from our feeder schools, for example. And so, step number 2 will be the organizing of this workshop, this big session of deep dive into the inquiry. It has to be formally decided, and the whole team of teachers have to give their full commitment to attend the workshop and be present in the activities. I think by now it should be clear that this idea I'm proposing is one of a self-coaching approach. We have to first rely on our own strengths and abilities to start to move forward. I think by now, for some of us who have been teaching for many years, we can agree that sometimes you can invite speakers or so-called experts from other places to give us a talk or a performance dialogue or a motivation session and so on and so forth. Yet, nothing solid will happen. This has been proven time and time again. And maybe it's time that we look at ourselves and see how far we can carry ourselves independently first, and then to be empowered freely in the process. Now, once this is done, then you can have step 3, 4, or 5. It can be many things. Now, at this juncture, I would like to give an example of what can be done. If it were me, I would propose an alternative approach, an alternative perspective to the process of teaching and learning of the English language. We know we have the full curriculum already set up, namely in our country it's called the CEFR, or the Common European Frame of Reference for Languages. And now that's a very big concept of language. However, in reality, the issues in language teaching remain the same. Can the students learn to master the language? Can they adopt the necessary positive behaviors and the right mental and psychological attitude towards the process of learning it? So I think the first big challenge at this stage would be on how to make the students appreciate, if not love, the language itself. And maybe we should begin with ourselves, the language teachers. Do we feel particularly privileged and gifted with the mastery of the language? Has our lives been enriched by it? And by implications, ultimately, as teachers, do we share or convey the same passion to our students? That would be the first thing that they should learn from us. If we are not sure about this, then perhaps that would make a very good first segment in the big workshops that I've just spoken about. And after that, then we can explore the possibilities of what we can do in order to change the overall collective perception of the students towards the language. Another way to put this more clearly is the question of how we can go beyond just the usual rudimentary excuses that we often hear. Sometimes we point out to the impression that the students might not be that interested, and I truly feel that that is not the default situation. And at this phase also, other things will come up. For example, the students may be really weak and have poor basics, not just in English, but also in other subjects as well. Now, that would be a slightly different dimension to the problem, and we can explore those as well, looking at what we can do about it. Language learning, or language in general, is always about the words in the vocabulary. So to improve the power of the vocabulary seems like a top priority. Evidently, with a weaker group of students, they will need an array of scaffolding or assistance. So we can think about what or how we can help structure their learning process. Help them to develop the habits to practice the language every day at school and in their personal hours. For example, a side project like the Word Book Journal project. We can help design a more practical way for them to collect vocabularies every day, and that will take all our heads to figure out how. The next step, if we are serious about it, is to turn the English language department itself into a productive house. For example, producing modules or self-coaching materials, to produce worksheets that are specifically designed by us in order to match the project that we are doing with our students and our students' level of abilities. For example, instead of just tearing pages from commercially found workbooks and compiling them, and binding them together as a finished product, maybe it's time for us to properly produce a more rational and realistic collection of grammar activities. It can consist of grammar items such as the word classes or class of speech. It can consist of sentence construction and sentence pattern, maybe how to write simple sentences without errors. We can have developmental stages of vocabulary training modules, and so on and so forth. The other thing that we need to focus on would be on the pronunciation, listening to the sounds of the English language and making the sounds. Maybe we can have a program or progressive lectures or workshops for the students, just focusing on English pronunciation, and slowly they can be exposed to the SRI, or the stress, rhythm, intonation of the English language. For the stronger students, we can make them focus on verbal communications and oral skills, and maybe public speaking skills for them to conduct forums and dialogues, more free-ranging types of activities and exercises. For the more advanced and more adventurous group of students, we can let them practice theater, for example, or poetry and recitation, and so on. And so these are the ideas that I'm putting forward this time. We know that at a glance it might seem a bit ambitious or demanding for us to do, but for some schools, they have no choice, especially when they are lagging behind and always the lowest achievers in public exams ranking, just as an example. And we are also aware of the vast and numerous other factors involved that we definitely need to face and confront. But all in all, we cannot just continue to say that there's not much we can do. We cannot just pretend that, things are all right and we can just go on routinely as we have done years after years, and still, being in the lowest group in comparison with other schools, for example. If we continue to do that, that will be a boring and a disappointing way to undertake our profession as language teachers. So perhaps slowly in the process we will need to be more creative and more outspoken. For example, in getting the full support of our school administrators, we have to convince them. That would be our next task. So in conclusion, by putting our minds together, we need to take a step back, like a retreat, and be generous enough to ourselves and trusting enough to explore the new objectives that we have just outlined bravely and with a new spirit and will. If others can do it, why not us? If not now, then when? The only limits of what we are capable of are the limits that we self-impose. No one is saying that we cannot do it. No one is saying that, we're not going to support you. It's just a matter of wanting enough to do it. And then we do it. And then we will find out the truth about it all. And thanks for listening. And I'll see you again in other videos.